Matthew 12:33. The Pharisees come to Jesus and they're super annoyed at him because his men were picking grain on the Sabbath. They were hungry. They were walking past a wheat field. Pick some grain. If you take a head of wheat, and like roll it in your hand, you'll get all the kernels in your hand and you can eat them. Okay, so they're picking grain, and the Pharisees come to him and like, "You're working on the Sabbath." And Jesus is like, "Don't you remember what David did? David, when he was running from Saul, went and the priest actually fed him and his men like the showbread that only the priests were supposed to eat." And he says the Sabbath, like, anyway. So they're mad at him. So he tells them, verse 33, says, "Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak what is good? For the mouth speaks out of that which fills the heart. The good man brings out his good treasure, out of his good treasure what is good, and the evil man brings out of his evil treasure what is evil." Okay? So he tells them a good tree can't produce bad fruit. Okay? How many of you like apples? What does an apple tree produce? Apples. Okay, you see an apple tree, we're like, yay, an apple. How many of you like figs? Okay, I really like figs. Some people are super like, about figs.
I like them fresh.
You don't like them?
I don't like them fresh. I like them dry.
Oh, they're so good. They're like eating a sea anemone, okay? But you okay, but okay, pretend, how many of you like plums? Oh, okay, well, that's my problem. I like all fruit. But say you really don't like plums, okay? You're not going to walk up to a plum tree and expect an apple and be like, "Stupid plum tree, give me a plum, not an apple," right? A tree produces its fruit. Look at Matthew 15, 18 through 19. Jesus tells them, let's go to verse 15. Start at the beginning of chapter 15, okay? Jesus is talking about purity. The Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands before they eat bread." And they had this rule, you have to wash your hands before you eat bread. Picture a whole bunch of fishermen out there like pulling in fish and like, I don't know if you've ever had a project where you're working and you like forget how dirty your hands are and you're eating and just you're busy. Yeah. So fishermen aren't going to take time to like, "Oh, I'm going to wash my hands." Like they're going to forget, right? So his Pharisees are like, "Your people do not wash their hands before." Now this is a rabbi technique, okay? Jesus was a rabbi. He was a teacher. Rabbis ask questions. So they asked him a question, and he answered them and said, "Why do you yourselves transgress the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition?" Okay, so he asks them a question in return. So they come to him like, "Why don't you wash your hands?" And he's like, "Why do you forsake the commandments of God? Because of your traditions." And they're like, right? He kind of throws it back in their face. Moms, try this with your kids when they're asking why all the time. I've done this with kids. They're like, "Why? Why?" I'm like, "Why do you think?" For God said, "Honor your father and mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death." Guys, that's a big one. Don't speak evil of your father and mother. There's consequences. "But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, 'Whatever I have that would help you has been given to God,' he is not to honor his father and mother. And by this you invalidate the word of God for the sake of your tradition." They invalidate the word of God for the sake of their tradition. This is called dogmatic theology. Dogmatic theology is where people take and add stuff to scripture and then abide by that. Okay? It's a huge word, but that's what it means. It's like made up men's rules that Christians are supposedly supposed to abide by. That's how I would basically sum it up. But he goes, why do you say, I tell you, honor your parents, and you say, if you tell your parents, I'm just surrendering everything I've ever done for you to the Lord, now I don't have to honor you. Because you're breaking the law of God for your tradition. Don't follow the dogmatic theologies. Okay, they're bad. He says, you hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine the precepts or the rules of men. Okay, so they had made this rule. You have to wash before you eat your food. And they come to Jesus and like, your men are breaking the law. He's like, that's something you made up. After Jesus called the crowd to him, he said to them, hear and understand. It is not what enters into the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth. This defiles the man. Because if you eat bread with unwashed hands, you're not, poof, a sinner. It's what comes out of you that defiles you. Okay? What comes out of you when you're rattled? I had a friend a while back, and it was several years ago, who we had a surprise birthday party for him. And his wife gave us the key to their apartment, and they came home one night to what he thought was an empty apartment, and there were 20 people in his apartment who scared the daylights out of him when he opened the door. The first thing that came out of his mouth was curse words. That's what came out. That's not how he was in any capacity. I never would have heard that from him, but when he was scared, what came out? Okay? What is your input? Because what goes in comes out. You can't get bad fruit from a good tree. Okay? This sounds like I'm honking my own horn, but I was in a super severe car wreck in Alaska. I was on a bicycle, was in a car wreck with a car. And I know a lot of people who, like, coming out of anesthesia, horrible stuff comes out of their mouth. Okay? I was in Alaska working with people, telling them about the Lord, and I thought I was going to die on the sidewalk. Like, I thought I was dying. So I was like, what do I need these people to know? And I remember telling them about Jesus as I was kind of like in and out of coherency. Okay, now that sounds like I'm like, whoo, I'm amazing. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I'm saying, what comes out when you're under dire circumstances, when things are difficult? If you get in a car wreck, what's the first thing you say? You're coming out of anesthesia. Are you going to be cursing? What is your input? Okay? Because that's a pretty good gauge. I would watch that. There's a lot of people like, I can watch that on entertainment. It doesn't affect me. And I'm like, yeah, but it does. It's going in. I would never say those words. Yeah, but they're in there. Okay? So just that's something to be aware of. Now, so verse 18, but the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, theft, false witness, slanders. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man. Okay? What goes in comes out. I bought popsicle molds this week. I have nieces and nephews. That's my excuse. Secretly, I just love popsicles. So I bought these like silicone popsicle molds. this week I made some grape juice. I was gonna put grape juice in them. Well, I got them and I watched them and I was all ready, and I realized I had frozen all my grape juice, and I'm kind of impatient and impetuous sometimes. And I was like, what fluid do I have? Like, I have a liquid. What can I freeze, right? Well, I had kombucha. Okay? I really like kombucha. So I was like, oh, it'll probably work. So I poured it into my popsicle molds, froze them. I was super excited. Yesterday I pulled one out. Do you know what that kombucha popsicle tastes like? Kombucha. It doesn't taste good. Okay? Even though it came out of a popsicle mold and looked like a popsicle, it tasted like kombucha. Now I normally really like kombucha, and this was like not good. Okay? So what goes in comes out. You put kombucha in your popsicle molds, you get kombucha popsicles. And they're not that stellar. I have 5 left if anybody wants one. Okay? They're a little bit, I think I'm gonna dump them out and try again. Okay? So be careful what your input is. Be careful what you're putting into you. Because what you put in comes out. Go back to chapter 11. We're doing concepts today instead of like verse by verse. Make sense? Okay, Jesus is talking about the kingdom. Go to verse 20. Go to verse 25. It says, at that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants, depending on how their heart is. Yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Son except the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Underline that verse. He says, come to me. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I was talking to somebody semi-recently who didn't know Jesus until recently. And they were telling me, they made a comment. It's such a relief to not be afraid to die. And I was like, what? He was like, it's such a relief to not be afraid to die. Because until I knew Jesus, I was terrified to die. Come to Jesus, you will find rest for your soul. Okay, it hit me so hard, and how he's now at rest. There's just a peace and a rest in knowing who Jesus is. Okay, you'll find rest for your souls. Chapter 12. Look at verse 14. Jesus is talking about, they ask him, go to verse 9. Departing from there, he went into their synagogue, and a man was there, his hand was withered. And they questioned Jesus, asking, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse him. And he said to them, what man is there among you who has a sheep? And if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will he not take hold of it and lift it out? Even though technically that would be working to save your sheep. How much more valuable then is a man than a sheep? So then is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Then he said to the man, this man came to him and he had a withered hand. He said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out and it was restored to normal like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him as to how they might destroy him. They so missed it. This man just got healed, and they were really annoyed at Jesus, to the point they were conspiring how to kill him. Okay, but Jesus, aware of this, withdrew from them. Many followed him, and he healed them all, and warned them all not to tell who he was. Can you imagine how confusing this was to the disciples? We're going to take over Rome. And he's like, here you're healed. Don't tell anybody who I am. What? We need to amass an army, right? I'm picturing this struggle between these 12 men of like, what? Why can't we tell who he is? And then he said, this was fulfilled, which was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Behold my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A battered reed he will not break off, and a smoldering wick he will not put out, until he leads justice to victory, and in his name the Gentiles will hope. Jesus' first coming, he came gently and quietly. Okay, go to Matthew 14. Nope, 13, sorry, I didn't tell where I want to be. Jesus goes through parables. So he's talking about the kingdom of heaven. He gives you guys examples of what the kingdom of heaven is like. It's a mystery. So he tells you the kingdom of heaven is like this. I have a friend who's blind. I tell her, this sunset is like this. And I try to give her sounds or flavors or something to compare it to, because I can't explain it, right? It's like this. So Jesus sees this huge fourth dimensional topic. How do you explain it? Okay, I worked with another gal who had been blind since birth. She asked me, how do you describe the stars? How do you describe the stars to somebody who's never seen? Okay, the best I could come up with is it's like carbonation. Each tiny little bubble makes a great thing. Each tiny little star makes, but reality, it doesn't work, right? You guys are like, yeah, that has no comparison at all. Okay, that's what Jesus is doing. He's going, this is the fourth dimension you can't see. The kingdom of heaven is like this. Okay? Chapter 13, verse 24. Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed tares, weeds, among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident also. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. The slaves told him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No, for while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow until the end of the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, First, gather up the tares and bind them in bundles and burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn. Okay, so he goes, it's kind of like this. Then he says, he presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And this is smaller than other seeds, but when it is full grown, it is larger than the garden plants, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. He spoke another parable to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened. All these things Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables, and he did not speak to them without a parable. Okay, so he goes, it's like this. It's like this. Okay, how many of you know how leaven works? Okay, you take warm water. We're going to do science here, okay? I can get the lid off. Okay, you take warm water and you add leaven. Okay, we're going to add some yeast. It doesn't take much. That was probably way too much. And then, look at how quickly it grows and it spreads. Okay, yeast is a live culture. Okay, and then you add flour. I only brought a tiny bit, but you add flour, And that little bit of leaven spreads through all of the flour, and then you get delicious fluffy bread. Okay? In 5 cups of flour, you usually put 2 tablespoons or something, like a small amount of yeast, of leaven. Okay, I make sourdough bread. You put like a cup of sourdough to 5 cups of flour. So I can think of words. Okay? But this will spread. So he says the kingdom of heaven is small. It's like leaven, but it will leaven the whole batch. Okay? How many of you know what a mustard seed is? All my visual learners. Okay? These are mustard seeds and leaven. Okay? Yeast. The mustard seeds are the bigger one. A mustard seed, grows a tree. I'm gonna just hand these, you guys can take one. Okay? A mustard seed is tiny. But a mustard seed will grow a tree. Okay? A pumpkin seed is pretty big. You plant it, the plant doesn't get very big at all. A mustard seed is tiny, tiny. And it grows a tree. Okay? The kingdom of heaven is like that. It's small, but it grows. Okay? It's like leaven. It doesn't seem like much, but it impacts a lot. Okay? Verse 36, then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, explain the parable of the field. And he said, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. And the field is the world. As for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. And the tares are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age. And the reapers are the angels. So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness. Glorious day, guys. This will be amazing. I've had this thought recently. I don't like the city, because the city just seems like the sweetened condensed version of evil, right? It just is pretty dark. And then we hear about the New Jerusalem and how in heaven it describes this big city, and I've always been like, great, we're gonna have to live in town. Like but picture the city without evil. Can you imagine if everybody, like all the people you love, lived in one town? It would be like, you guys probably don't know Andy Griffith's show. It would be like Mayberry. You get to know everybody. It's good. Everybody knows each other. You can go visiting and play in the streets, and kids are safe, and it's good. Okay? When God removes the evil, it's going to be so good. It's going to be so good. He will remove those who commit lawlessness and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is a concept in that 4th dimension of evil will bring weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay? The punishment will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It will be horrid. Okay? Verse 44, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it goes and sells all that he has and buys the field. Like, okay, it's worth a lot. It's worth giving up everything else you have for the treasure. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. And upon finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Okay? All of these are allegorical of what the kingdom is like. It's kind of like this. It's like a mustard seed. It's like leaven. It affects everything, right? It grows. It's a treasure. It's the most valuable thing you'll have. Verse 51. Jesus says, have you understood all these things? And they said to him, yes. And Jesus said to them, therefore, every scribe who has become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like a head of a household who brings out of his treasure things new and old. Okay? There's a treasure in seeking the Lord. There's a treasure in knowing the Lord. I think it was Augustine that talked about, I'll have to find the quote, but he talked about a man's greatest pleasure is seeking the Lord, and his greatest treasure is finding him. And I would challenge you with that. You will never regret time spent seeking the Lord in any capacity. In any capacity. Okay, verse 14 or chapter 14. John is in prison because he told Philip, or he told, we're just gonna read it because I'm not gonna get all the names. Verse 3. For when Herod had John arrested, he bound him up and put him in prison because of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip. So he had taken his sister-in-law. Gross. For John had been saying to him, it is not lawful for you to have her. John didn't mince words. John just said it how it was, and it got him thrown in prison. For John had been saying to him, it is not lawful for you to have him. Although Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded John as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. The other Gospels tell him he said he would give her up to half his kingdom. Okay? Having been prompted by her mother, who I get the impression is kind of a wily, evil person, she said, give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist. Ew. Right? Like, that's so gross. What girl is going to be like, hey, I'd like a head on a platter? But she did. It's disgusting. Although he was grieved, the king commanded it to be given because of his oath and because of his dinner guests. And he sent and had John beheaded in prison. Okay? So John the Baptist dies. Verse 13. Now when Jesus heard about John, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. Remember how Jesus talked about how the one demon had to come out with prayer and fasting. Pay attention this week to how much time Jesus spends alone, praying with the Lord. Alright? It's why his ministry was so effective. A huge part of it. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, this place is desolate and the hour is already late. So send the crowds away that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. But Jesus said to them, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Who did he just give the responsibility to? To feed 5,000 people. What did he say? Get her to talk. Elijah.
Disciples.
Yeah. He said, you give them something to eat. You do it. Okay? You do it. Now, did the disciples have the capacity to feed this many people? This was like a year and a half's wages. Okay? Say a guy now makes $80,000 a year. You're gonna feed that many people, it's gonna take a lot of money, right? They go, that's a year's wages. How on earth would we feed everybody? Jesus says, you give them something to eat. They said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Okay? So they have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. We're gonna have tuna sandwiches, right? How far is that gonna get you? Not very far. But they say, this is what we have. Ordering the people to, he said, bring them to me. Bring them here to me. Verse 19. Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food. Breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowd. Okay, so he says, you do it. They bring his 5 loaves. Jesus breaks it and gives it back to the disciples. He gives it back to the disciples and has them distribute it among the people. The disciples gave it then to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. Now, I'm no mathematician, but 5,000. If each of those guys has his wife with him, how many people is that now? Okay, so we have 10,000. What if each of them has 1 kid? What if some of them have 6? Right? Okay, so we're looking at probably at least 15,000 people. They just counted the men. It's easier that way, right? Too many people. So there's an incredible concept here. Jesus tells them, you do it. They come to him with what they have. He multiplies it and gives it back to them. I'm going to tell you now, there was a point in my life where I told God, God, I will not work with teenagers. I can't work with teenagers. They terrify me. I can work with little kids because they're super easy to befriend, and I can work with old people because they're cute and fun to talk to, but I cannot work with teenagers. Okay? Think about that. And I also, I think about it now, I was going on a mission trip when I was 14. And our youth group was like, Hannah, come on up. We want to pray for you before, and I died inside. Like, please don't make me stand in front of everybody. I'm going to tell you, I still get kind of ugh before I talk in front of people. But God asked me, what do you have? What do you have? And I told him I was willing. Okay? Now, he didn't just poof magically like, whoa, now you can teach, now you're not terrified of teenagers. No. I had to work on it. Okay? He said, what do you have? And I told him, I'm willing to give you my life. Do with it what you want. And then he sent me through, I've been through multiple trainings, learning how to teach. I have taught hundreds of hours on a Bible bus to small people, so that I wasn't terrified of big people. Like, right? So he took what I gave him, he broke it, he multiplied it, and then he gave it back to me. Somebody asked me a while back, what would you say your spiritual gift is? And I said, teaching. Which goes against everything I used to be. Okay? But I gave it to God. He said, you do it. He gave me a desire to teach an Old Testament survey class. Right? Have to be in front of people and it's teenagers, right? But I said, okay, I'm willing. He broke it, he multiplied it, and then he gave it back as a gift. Okay? Look at your life and go, would I be willing to even give him the things that scare me? Okay? I'm not terrified of Africa. It doesn't scare me. Do I feel called to Africa? No. Okay, and I'm not saying find what terrifies you and pursue that, but I will say I can give credit to God that I can teach because I know it's not from me. If it was something I was boldly confident in, I wouldn't need God in it. I wouldn't need God in it, and then it wouldn't be hard. It wouldn't be hard to go, okay, I've got this for you. Okay? So I'm not saying, okay, you're terrified of snakes, go play with snakes. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, expect God to use what you give him. And if you struggle with something, we'll get to it later in the New Testament, but Paul said, Jesus told him, my grace is sufficient for you because my strength is perfected in your weakness. And then Paul says, therefore most gladly I will boast in my infirmity, or I will boast in my weakness, for it is the power of God. And that's what I'm telling you. God took something that terrified me, and now I can boast in it because his grace is sufficient. His grace is enough for this. Now, do I have to prep and prepare and pray and stress? And did I have nightmares for weeks before class started? Yeah. I had nightmares that people were playing the piano in the middle of class and that nobody would show up, or they would bring their infants and they would be crying and I would be like, I'm sorry, but your kid needs to be quiet, and they would get mad at me, crazy things, okay? So I'm not saying it's easy. I had some bizarre, praise the Lord, I woke up kind of dreams about class. But I will tell you that God's grace is sufficient. So, what do you have? Let him break and multiply it. Let him grow it. Okay? Any questions? Verse 22 of chapter 14. Immediately he made the disciples get into a boat, go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was alone. But the boat was already a long distance from land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Do you think maybe he was praying for his disciples? They're in the middle of a storm and he's praying. Okay? You'll walk through storms in your life. Jesus hasn't abandoned you. Okay? When the fourth watch of the night had come, in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them and saying, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. They are in the midst of a violent storm. He just tells them, don't be afraid. Peter said to him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. Now remember, in just a few verses ahead of this, he said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for it is easy and my burden is light. And then listen to what he says to Peter. He just says, come. Look what Peter does. And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. He obeyed and he walked on water. But seeing the wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Okay, I have heard people oh, Peter, he got distracted by the waves and he started to not trust God. Tell me anybody else who's walked on water. besides him and Jesus, right? He obeyed and he did the miraculous. And yeah, he started to look at the storm and it got overwhelming. But he walked on water. He said, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? I almost hear Jesus laughing. I don't feel like this is a reprimand, like, you have little faith. Like, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? Like, you were doing it. Okay? My little brothers, I have twin brothers, when they were learning to walk, one of them super carefully calculated, like, he would get up along a table and like work along the table as he figured out balance, and he'd like let go and think about it and reach back. The other one would climb up and just like, and just run until he fell, right? And that's just the way they did it. Stephen would just crash and burn. Samuel would like work his way along slow and steady as Stephen's just like running. And I think of Jesus seeing Peter like that. Like, you just got up and ran and you crashed hard and you did a good job. Like, why did you doubt? You were doing it. Why did you doubt? Verse 32, when they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, you are certainly God's son. You are certainly God's son. When they had crossed over to the land, they came to the land at Gennesaret. Okay, last time they crossed the sea, what did they do? Who did they meet? You read about it this week. Who did they meet? The demon-possessed man. Yes. And Jesus cast the demons out of him, and they were like, please leave. The people of the town. Okay? Then they go over to Gennesaret, which I don't know how close it is to where the demon-possessed men were, but look at what happens. When they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized him, they sent word into all the surrounding district and brought to him all who were sick. Word had traveled. Guys, it's Jesus. Okay? It's Jesus, and here he is. Okay, go to Matthew 15:32. Jesus called his disciples and said to him, I feel compassion for the people, because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might faint on the way. The disciples said to him, where would we get so many loaves in this desolate place to satisfy such a large crowd? Okay, they need another practice run at this, right? Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? What do you have? And they said 7 and a few small fish. I would challenge you guys now. What do you have? What do you have? Growing up, I felt like I was invalid in the kingdom of God because I was doing school, right? It was like, when I grow up, I'll be able to do important things. Right now, I'm stuck doing school. Get over it, guys. You have to do school. It's part of life, okay? But what do you have? You have the ability to minister to your family. You have the ability to help your mom. You have the ability to talk to guys on your sports teams. You have the ability to write letters to kids in orphanages. You have the ability. What do you have? Because you need to learn to be faithful in little things so that you can be faithful in big things. So look at your life and go, what do I have? One of your homework things this week is to see a need and meet it. Okay? Not your typical, like, your everyday chores, like, I did my chores. No. I want you to see a need and meet it. Okay? I have a little guy in Mexico that I write letters to, and we write back and forth. I send him a birthday present on his birthday. We're friends. Okay? It's simple. It doesn't take much. And he knows there's somebody praying for him. His picture's on my board, and I pray for him. And he wants to be a teacher someday, and he's good at math, and he loves living in the orphanage he's in because they have enough to eat. And Julian and I just write back and forth. It's simple. What do you have?
How would they find a connection like that? How did you
Oh, I could hook you up. I could give you letters or people to contact if you want to write letters to kids. Anyway, what do you have? See a need, meet a need. Okay? Pray for people. I have a friend who worked in Jordan, and she printed off cards to pray for her and people she was working with. My nieces and nephews they prayed for her every night. And my brother one day was like, they got in a fist fight last night over who got to pray for her. Because they wanted to pray, it was their turn. And they were like, no, it's my turn. You know, he's like, they got in a fight over it because they wanted to pray. They are 7 and 4, and they're praying, okay? What do you have that you can bring as an offering and let God multiply? He said to them, verse 34, how many loaves do you have? And they said 7, and a few small fish. And they fed 4,000 men. Matthew 16, verse 1. The Pharisees and Sadducees came up, and testing Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. Okay, if you're the Son of God, prove it. Right? Prove it. He's like, what about prophecy? What about miracles? All John needed was the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear. And John knew. Okay? The Pharisees' hearts were so far from God. These were the religious leaders of the time. They said, okay, prove it. Show us a sign. God told Abraham, I will multiply you. And it says Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And then Abraham asked, Lord, how will I know? And God says, this is what I will do. Okay? But these people come with almost an arrogance of, show us a sign. Prove it. He replied to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times? An evil and adulterous generation seek after a sign, and a sign will not be given it, except the sign of Jonah. And he left them and went away. He goes, I'll give you a sign, but it's not what you want. You're just going to get the sign of Jonah. He warns them, verse 6, watch out, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Beware of little things that are wrong that the Pharisees say that will infect you. Beware of dogmatic theologies. Beware of people who preach a different gospel. Beware. Verse 13 of chapter 16. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And he said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, and this sealed my question. Why doesn't Jesus just tell them who he is? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Verse 17, and Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Your heart allowed my Father to reveal this to you. Jesus didn't just walk up to Simon Peter and say, hey, I'm the Son of God, follow me. And Peter goes, okay. He said, God revealed this to you. Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Guys, it all goes back to our heart. It's a heart thing. Flesh and blood didn't reveal it to you. My Father. This verse made me cry. I was reading and I just started crying. Verse 18, also I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, That's a big calling for Peter. And look at the second part. And the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I feel like our church is in dire circumstances right now. There's a lot of people believing a lot of lies in the church. And this was just such a promise. The gates of Hades will not prevail. Despite the devil's wild ways, the gates of Hades will not prevail. Verse 20. Then he warned the disciples that they should tell no one that he was the Christ. Okay? And then he began to tell them that he was going to die. He tells them, they're going to kill me and I will rise again. And Peter says, no, it can't be. And he tells them, get behind me, Satan. Verse 23, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but on man. Remember, God says, let him who glories glory in this, that he knows me, that I am loving kindness and justice, right? God's justice had to be fulfilled of a requirement for sin. That sin had to be atoned for. Verse 25, for whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his fathers with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Notice how he just tells them he's coming a second time. Mark that, underline it, do something with it. He says they're going to take me and they're going to kill me. I'm going to lose my life, all of this. For the Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Verse 17, 6 days later, Jesus took with him, chapter 17, took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. They saw him in his glory. Okay? And his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Peter said to him, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. Jesus says to them, Get up, do not be afraid. And they lifted up their eyes and saw no one except Jesus himself. And they were coming down from the mountain. Jesus commanded them, saying, Tell the vision to no one until, underline this, until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. Okay? So he's telling them, I'm going to suffer. This is going to happen. I'm going to die. But I'm coming back. And I think he showed them, this is me in my glorified state. And maybe at this point, I don't know, but maybe at this point they began to see, oh, this is the suffering servant that he was talked about. This is also the king that will come back. Okay, and maybe at this point, I don't know, but maybe at this point they began to realize this is a twofold thing. This isn't just a one-time deal. This is 2 separate things. Okay? Okay. Jesus predicts his death a second time in 17:22. He tells them, I will die, they will kill me, and I will be raised again the 3rd day. They knew this was coming. They knew. He was telling them, this is going to happen. Okay, chapter 24. Real life hits, and they have to pay taxes. Okay, this is an interesting thing. Now this is chapter 17, verse 24. They have to pay taxes. Now notice, Jesus sends Peter to go catch a fish. He opens the fish's mouth, and there's enough money in to pay the taxes for Jesus and Peter. I would argue, and I don't know this for a fact, but do you think maybe the other disciples weren't old enough to need to pay taxes yet? Jesus was potentially working with super young people. Okay? They maybe weren't even of the age they had to pay taxes yet, because only him and Peter paid taxes. Unless Jesus just left them high and dry, like, sorry, Andrew, figure out how to pay your own taxes. But Peter and Jesus were the only ones. And I don't know, if somebody wants to study this out and figure out what the age for paying taxes was, but they might have been pretty young. So, which makes sense with chapter 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Which of us is most important? Right? And he called a child to himself and set them before him. Set him before them and said, truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Verse 10. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that their angels in heaven continually see the face of my Father who's in heaven. There's that fourth dimension again. There's that fourth dimension where we're like, wait, what? Okay? Their angels in heaven see, and that's all we get. It's just a little bit. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. And then the rest of 18 talks about how life works in the kingdom. Okay? 15, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. It talks about how you discipline in the kingdom. If you correct something in somebody and they don't correct it, you take a couple more people with you. Okay? If they still don't correct it, then you take it before the church. Like he just explains kingdom life. Here's how life works in the kingdom. Verse 21, then Peter came to him and said to him, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And he said, up to 70 times 7. That's 490 times in the kingdom. Okay, and he tells a parable about a man who was forgiven a ton of stuff and then went and tried to beat nickels and dimes out of somebody that owed him a little bit. And Jesus and the master said, you are forgiven much. Why can't you forgive this guy this? Okay? In the kingdom, you've been forgiven a lot by the Lord. Forgive. That's how it works in the kingdom. Chapter 19, verse 13. Then some children were brought to him so that he might lay hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked him. I feel like maybe they kicked into warrior mode and like, kids can't fight against Rome. I feel like they're still struggling with this, like, we're gonna conquer, right? And Jesus says, let the children come to me. Okay? We are going to stop there. I emailed your mom's thought questions. As you're reading, read my questions and answer them. Okay? If you have questions, contact me. Any questions? Did your homework make sense last week?
I hope it is.
Oh boy. Yes, you turned it in. All right, let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Lord, thank you that when we bring what we have to you, you multiply it. Thank you that your kingdom is small and it grows. Thank you that you are working. Thank you for who you are. God, I pray that you just reveal to everyone in this room your word and who you are as they read your word this week. Lord, you promise your word will not return void, and pray that they see that. As they read, they see it impacting, they see it making a difference in them. Lord, I pray that they will read it and apply it. Thank you for who you are. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thank you guys.